A simple woman walked into one of the most powerful financial empires on earth, wearing nothing but a plain white linen shirt, and just minutes later, after being humiliated, mocked, and shredded by the arrogant panel, she stood silent as the CEO himself bowed before her, his voice trembling, calling her Madam Chairwoman. What happened inside that glass tower changed the future of Wall Street forever. Stay with me. You absolutely need to hear this story. Before we dive in, tell me, where in the world are you watching from today? Drop it in the comments, and if this story moves, you don't forget to subscribe for more stories that matter. It started like just another ordinary morning. The glass monolith known as Altera Group towered over the Manhattan skyline, slicing through the misty dawn like a titan of industry. Its reflective windows caught the first light of day, turning the entire building into a beacon of cold, blinding power. The marble lobby sprawled like a palace, echoing with the hurried footsteps of executives whose suits cost more than most people's annual salaries. Gold-trimmed elevators glided soundlessly up and down, ferrying the elite to their glass-walled sanctuaries. The chandelier overhead, large enough to crush a small car, refracted the morning sun into fractured rainbows that scattered across the floors like broken dreams. Into this cathedral of wealth walked Elena Royce. She didn't strive. She didn't command the space. She simply moved forward with quiet, deliberate grace, her white linen shirt crisp and clean, her cream trousers tailored but unadorned, her flat shoes whispering against the marble. No makeup, no jewelry, save a simple wedding band. Her hair was pulled back in a low, neat ponytail, exposing a face marked not by vanity, but by life. Warm hazel eyes, steady as oakwood skin, kissed by sun and time. In her hand, a plain canvas tote. In the tote, a battered notebook, a simple pen, and a worn dog-eared copy of The Wealth of Nations. No designer briefcase, no portfolio glinting with gold logos, no corporate armor. Just ideas, just quiet power wrapped in humility. But none of them could see that. The first crack of disdain came fast. A young receptionist, too busy admiring her own diamond studs, barely looked up before smirking and pointing sideways. "Interview candidates use the service entrance, ma'am," she said, dismissing Elena with a casual flick of her manicured hand. Elena nodded, adjusting the strap of her tote, her face unreadable. The side hallway she was ushered into was a sterile passage where other candidates stood, men and women clad in tailored Gucci suits, gleaming Rolex watches peeking from under monogrammed cuffs, Louboutin heels clicking against the stone. They glanced up as she entered, and the laughter began. Soft at first, then sharper. One woman, sleek in a Gucci skirt, nudged her friend and stage whispered, "Is that her briefcase? Or a grocery bag?" A tall man in a pinstripe suit, Jared Hall, stepped forward exaggeratedly, plucking a crumpled dollar bill from his pocket. He tossed it at Elena's feet with a theatrical smirk. "For your dry cleaning," he sneered. The hallway erupted in cruel chuckles. Phones were whipped out. Cameras clicked. A man wearing a Rolex Ethan Crane snapped a quick photo of Elena standing there, tote slung over her shoulder, dignity burning brighter than any of their $1,000 suits. Within seconds, the picture was posted in a private group chat labeled Alterara Wannabes, captioned "Hat Budget Candidate." The group closed in around her like hyenas. One woman chanted, "No suit, no shot," while others whispered venomously, "Lost intern," or "Maybe she's with the cleaning crew." The hallway buzzed with humiliation, thick and heavy. Elena simply stood there, breathing in, breathing out, the muscles around her mouth relaxing into a small, almost imperceptible smile. She said nothing, did nothing, but her hazel eyes sharpened quietly, observing, recording. A junior HR associate nearby, a woman named Emily Voss, watched the spectacle unfold without lifting a finger to intervene. She smirked when Jared bumped shoulders with Elena, accidentally nearly knocking the tote from her grasp. Emily even raised her phone and filmed a few seconds for her own private amusement, intending to upload it later to the company Slack under a hidden fail thread. Alterara's elite documenting the fall of a nobody. The call came. It was time. Elena entered the interview room, a sleek, cold conference space with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city like a throne surveying a conquered land. 3 panelists awaited: HR Director Michael Callahan, Senior Manager Vanessa Clean, and Director of Operations David Reese. All immaculate in their arrogance, Callahan barely glanced up before barking a laugh. "Are you the candidate? Thought you were the coffee lady." Vanessa didn't bother hiding her disdain. "Is this how you dress for Alterara interviews?" she said, her voice slicing through the room like a whip. Didn't anyone tell you there's a standard? David Reese simply flipped through the pages in front of him, each turn sharper, more disdainful than the last. His cufflinks glinted under the cold light. His smile was cold. Elena placed her resume gently on the table. "If you would kindly review my qualifications," she said calmly, "we can proceed." Callahan didn't even touch it. He tossed the folder to the side like a piece of trash. The questions they asked were designed to humiliate. They asked her to explain mergers she'd led, only to cut her off mid-sentence, scoffing that her experience sounded assistant level. They flashed a giant slide on the projector labeled Candidate Attire Standards, with a red X slashed across a stock photo of a woman wearing unmistakably a linen shirt. "This is you, isn't it?" David sneered. Laughter erupted around the room. Vanessa handed Elena a 5-page financial analysis test, setting a timer for 3 minutes, knowing full well it was impossible to complete. "Let's see if you can at least keep up," she said, her lipstick curling into a cruel smile. Outside the glass walls, the other candidates peeked in phones, raised, documenting every smirk, every insult, every piece of Elena's dignity. They thought they were stripping away, but Elena remained composed. Every insult was a pebble thrown against a mountain. At one point, Jared barged into the interview room, slapping Callahan on the back like an old friend. The message was clear. The spot was already his. Elena was merely entertainment, a punchline. Finally, when it seemed the cruelty could not escalate further, Callahan stood and slammed his fist against the table. "You're wasting our time," he bellowed. "You're not Alterera material. You're blacklisted from this firm. Don't even think about setting foot here again." Vanessa rose as well, her heels clicking like gunshots on marble. She pointed at Elena's tote with a disdainful twist of her wrist. "Security check her bag before she leaves. Wouldn't be surprised if she's stealing company pens." The security guard. Victor stepped forward with deliberate menace. Elena calmly unzipped her bag, revealing nothing but her notebook, her pen, and her battered copy of The Wealth of Nations. Victor muttered under his breath, "Shady," as the panel laughed again, a chorus of cruelty. The final blow came as Callahan grabbed Elena's resume, tore it down the middle, and threw the pieces into the air like confetti. Vanessa kicked Elena's book across the floor. Jared mockingly saluted her as she bent to pick it up. Phones caught it all. Laughter echoed through the halls. Comments flew. "Loser," "library girl," "trash queen." Elena gathered her belongings, straightened her linen shirt, and pressed the elevator button with a hand that did not tremble. The marble floors shimmered under the chandelier's cold light, casting rainbows she no longer noticed. As the elevator doors slid shut behind her, cutting her off from their scorn, she allowed herself one single breath. They thought they had won, but the story was only just beginning. The elevator doors slid open onto the 45th floor, far from the main lobby where Elena had first entered. Instead of descending to the street where she might have slipped away into the city's roar, she had been intercepted. A young man in a navy suit waited, his demeanor brisk but respectful. His name tag read Lucas, executive assistant to the CEO. Without fanfare, he gestured for her to follow. No one in the elevator lobby spared her a second glance. They were too busy hustling portfolios, murmuring into Bluetooth headsets, or adjusting Hermes ties in the mirrored walls. Elena walked behind Lucas, her tote swinging lightly at her side. Her steps measured calm, but inside her the coals of purpose had ignited into something hotter, something dangerous. Lucas led her through a side hallway, bypassing the grand conference rooms filled with mid-level managers, and instead moving toward the boardroom wing, an area usually off-limits to anyone without a C-suite badge. They passed security checkpoints where guards barely glanced up, oblivious to the quiet storm moving through their perimeter. At a discreet entrance framed by frosted glass, Lucas paused and turned to her. His voice was low, controlled. "They're waiting for you." "Madam Chairwoman," he said. Elena gave a single nod. No flourish, no dramatics, just a steady acknowledgement. When the door swung open, the room inside fell into silence. At the massive mahogany table lined with high-backed leather chairs sat the senior leadership of Alterera Group directors who had helmed mergers that shook entire industries, CFOs who had weathered market collapses, legal minds who had rewritten international tax laws to their favor. They sat poised, pens resting neatly atop monogrammed notebooks, expressions frozen between expectation and unease. At the head of the table stood Gideon Price, CEO of Alterera, A man whose name was spoken on Wall Street with a mixture of reverence and terror. His hair flecked with silver caught the muted light. His tailored suit did not hide the tension rippling across his shoulders. He moved first, stepping away from his position of dominance, crossing the space between them with long, decisive strides, and then in front of the entire board. Gideon Price bowed his head slightly, his voice carrying a tremor that none had ever heard before. "Madam Chairwoman," he said, the words slicing the air clean. Gasps rippled down the table like falling dominoes. A director halfway through a sip of water choked and set his glass down with a trembling hand. A marketing VP dropped her Mont Blanc pen, the clatter echoing obscenely loud against the polished wood. Elena Royce inclined her head in return, her face unreadable. She stepped fully into the room, now allowing the light to catch on the badge pinned just above her heart, a small but unmistakable gold insignia, the official seal of the Alterara Board of Directors engraved with her name. The door behind her shut with a soft thud, sealing the panikins. She walked slowly, deliberately, placing her tote on the long table without a sound. For a moment, no one breathed. Then Elena spoke, her voice even and low, but amplified by the stunned silence. "I didn't come here today," she said, "to interview for a position. I came to inspect the system." Confusion flickered across some faces. Others paled visibly, pieces falling into place in their minds at terrifying speed. 10 years ago, when Alterara was on the brink of public scandal over discriminatory hiring practices, Elena, then an independent consultant, had rebuilt their recruitment process from the ground up. Transparent, merit-based, bulletproof, they had called it, the Royce Standard. It had been her baby, a project she had overseen with ruthless precision before stepping back to chair a private philanthropic foundation. Now she was back. And it was clear her faith in the system had eroded enough that she had felt the need to personally go undercover to test its integrity. "You, Elena said, her gaze sweeping over them, "have let rot seep into the walls." No one dared respond. The walls themselves seemed to inch backward. She reached into her tote and withdrew a sleek tablet. With a tap of her finger, the main wall screen behind Gideon flickered to life, replacing the company logo with a live projection. Screenshots, Slack conversations, Instagram posts, all the digital fingerprints of the humiliation she had endured downstairs. Photos of her tote mocked in group chats. Memes captioned, "Coffee Lady Crashes." Slack threads titled, "Dressed to Fail." Every smug smirk, every cruel laugh now hung in the air like a stench. "And this," Elena said, gesturing at the evidence without raising her voice, "is what your elite culture now stands for." Gideon's jaw was clenched so tight a vein pulsed at his temple. But he said nothing. This was her stage now. Without breaking eye contact, Elena shifted the screen again. Bank records, donation trails, internal emails with promises written too casually. "If we fast-track Jared, the donation will clear by month's end," one read. She watched the blood drain from Michael Callahan's face, from Vanessa Clean's lipstick-painted sneer, from David Reese's suddenly sagging shoulders. "You have sold integrity for quantum," Elena said. "You have replaced merit with nepotism, talent with corruption, vision with vanity." No dramatic music played, no gavel slammed, yet the words landed with a force that bent the room. A whisper stirred at the far end of the table, a director leaning into another, their faces tight with panic. Another checked his phone under the table, no doubt texting a damage control PR team that wouldn't be able to staunch this flood. "You judged a candidate by her shirt," Elena said, taking one slow step forward. Without once asking about her mind, her ideas, her soul, she let the silence stretch, let it marinate in their shame. "Effective immediately." Gideon spoke up, finally, his voice stripped of all warmth. "An independent investigation into recruitment corruption will be launched. Temporary suspensions will be issued pending findings." Elena nodded, once approving the move, but her gaze didn't soften. "I will not allow Alterara," she continued, "to become another fallen empire rotted from the inside." The directors sat rigid, not daring to move. Elena stepped back, picked up her tote, and spoke one final time, her words branding themselves into the air. "Trust is expensive," she said. "You spent it like loose change. Now you will pay the price." She walked to the door, Lucas stepping forward to open it for her. The glass walls reflected the stunned, broken faces of Alterara's highest authorities as she passed. In the hallway beyond, the ripple effect had already begun. Word traveled faster than light. The chairwoman had been here. She had seen everything. She had exposed everything. Junior staff froze as she passed. Some turned away, red-faced. Others dropped their phones, realizing the videos and jokes they had shared moments ago were now artifacts of their downfall. Outside the boardroom, the candidates who had mocked her in the waiting area were still loitering, expecting another easy target, another laugh. But now they watched with slack-jawed horror as Lucas projected the evidence onto a giant digital display above the lobby. Elena's badge, her credentials, the full network of corruption revealed. Jared Hull's white smirk melted. Leah Tate's Gucci scarf seemed to choke her. Ethan Crane tried to slip away toward the side doors, but security guards moved fast, cutting off his escape in the glass tower of Alterara. The gods had fallen, and Elena Royce, once mocked as a coffee lady, had redrawn the entire sky. As she left the building, stepping into the bright blaze of a New York noon, she lifted her face to the sun. The war wasn't over, it was only just beginning. The city buzzed outside Alterara's gleaming glass walls, unaware of the quiet storm unraveling within. Elena's simple flats clicked against the polished marble sidewalks as she crossed the plaza, leaving behind a crumbling empire whose heart she had cracked open with little more than her dignity and patience. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The foundations were already shuddering behind her. Inside the tower, chaos bloomed. Within an hour of her departure, Gideon Price initiated an emergency lockdown of all Alterara communications. Internal emails were frozen. Company Slacks were archived. The HR department was summoned to assemble a preliminary list of all staff members mentioned in the evidence Elena had provided, and the list was longer than anyone had dared to imagine. Not just Callahan, Clean, and Reese, not just Jared Hull and the glittering group of cronies who had mocked Elena in the hallway. No, it spread like mold through the rafters. Junior managers accepting gifts for referrals, directors leaking candidate rankings to insiders, executive assistants altering interview scores under whispered orders. Gideon stood in the middle of the situation room, a sterile glass nerve center, his blue eyes hard as ice. He issued commands like a general on a battlefield. Names flagged for suspension, security details assigned to collect badges, IT, specialists tasked with locking out systems before anyone could destroy evidence. No second chances, no graceful exits. The first to fall was Michael Callahan. Security officers entered his sprawling corner office mid-rant. He was shouting at his assistant, demanding to know how this could have happened, barking into a phone gripped so tightly it looked ready to shatter. When two guards flanked him, their faces grim, Callahan's voice sputtered into silence. His face turned an unnatural shade of purple as they removed his access badge and placed a firm but polite hand on his arm. "Sir, you'll need to come with us," one said. Callahan fought, of course. How could he not? His pride was a brittle thing snapping in front of a dozen horrified junior employees who peeked out from their cubicles, but it was useless. The moment he was marched past the lobby's massive media wall, now displaying Elena's official badge and her mission statement, he knew he was finished. Security footage later captured the moment when Callahan, hands trembling, watched a breaking news alert scroll across the TV screens. Alterara chairwoman exposes massive corruption. Top executives under investigation. His name was already trending alongside words like fraud, bribery, and cover-up. Vanessa Clean tried to salvage herself by slipping out through a service elevator. She donned a trench coat over her blood-red power suit, sunglasses shielding her darting eyes. But cameras caught her too, a shark thrown from the water onto concrete, gasping, thrashing. By the time she reached the garage, her corporate card had already been canceled. Her company-issued car refused to start. She stood there in the cold air, gripping her designer purse like a life raft, realizing she had no way back inside. No way back at all. David Reese fared no better. He attempted to hole up in his office, shredding files with a desperation so naked it almost bordered on comedy. The shredder jammed halfway through a stack of emails. His assistant, younger, sharper, and more terrified, alerted security. Immediately, Reese left Alterara escorted by two guards, his cufflinks glinting in the afternoon sun, his laptop and phone seized for evidence. Jared Hull, the pre-selected golden boy, received the news through his lawyer. He had tried to bluff, claiming innocence, spinning tales of being misled, manipulated, merely a donor, not a co-conspirator. But Alterara's forensic accountants, unleashed with Elena's blessing, had already traced a $200,000 consulting fee wired to Callahan's private account, The memo line on the transfer for services rendered expedited placement. There was no place to hide. Outside Altarara's fortress, the media firestorm grew. Networks scrambled for footage, talk shows debated the ethical decay of corporate hiring. Hashtags exploded across every platform. Hashtag Royce Reckoning, Trust Not Ties, Linen Revolution. Even more powerful was the footage Lucas had leaked to trusted journalists. Jared tossing a dollar bill at Elena's feet, Callahan shredding her resume, Vanessa pointing at her tote with disgust. These weren't just rumors anymore. They were images burned into the collective public mind. Employees within Altarara began panicking. Whispers turned into frenzied phone calls. Office grew, chats buzzed with fear. Names circulated like death warrants. People who had laughed, who had participated in the mockery, who had forwarded cruel memes, who had signed off on shady hires. Gideon ordered a mandatory town hall meeting streamed to every floor. No excuses, no absences. The once invincible employees filed into the atriums and common areas, their badges flashing against nervous hands. For the first time in Altarara's history, the chandeliers did not sparkle with triumph. They hung like heavy verdicts above bowed heads. On the giant main screen, Elena's face appeared a live feed from a secure location. No makeup, no retouching, no corporate gloss, just the linen shirt, the steady hazel gaze that had unraveled an empire. I did not come to Altarara to destroy it. She began, her voice calm, resonant. I came to save it. She spoke of merit, of fairness, of a future where your worth wasn't measured by your watch or your suit, but by your ideas, your ethics, your grit. She spoke of the Royce standard returning harder, stronger without exceptions. From this day forward, Elena said, no hire will be influenced by wealth, appearance, or privilege. We will review applications blind. We will interview anonymously. Skills, first, substance, first, always. The employees listened, silent, riveted. Some wept. Some bowed their heads, shame burning in their cheeks. Some, the worst ones, fled to update their resumes. But even they knew their names were already tainted. Then came the hammer strike. Elena announced a purge, a list of 20 executives, managers, and HR staff who had participated in systemic bias, bribery, and gatekeeping. Each name scrolled down the screen like a guillotine blade. By the time the broadcast ended, the firings had begun. LinkedIn profiles went dark. Security badges were deactivated mid-coffee break. Slack accounts signed off one by one in a slow, inevitable extinction. Elena didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Her actions spoke louder than any triumphal parade. The world watched. The Financial Times called it the Chairwoman's Revolution. The Economist printed a full cover story, how one linen shirt changed Wall Street forever. Harvard Business Review requested Elena write a case study. But Elena, sitting by the window of her Brooklyn brownstone that night, her daughter curled beside her reading picture books, simply closed her eyes and breathed in the scent of home. The tote sat quietly on the kitchen table, its worn fabric a reminder of everything she had carried and everything she had refused to let go of. Her vision, her truth, her integrity. Altarara's Instagram, once a catalog of luxury and exclusivity, now filled with photos of scholarship recipients, second chance hires, and diverse faces, no longer filtered through the lens of elitism. Underneath each post, the pinned comment read, "The Royce standard lives here." And somewhere far from the glitter and the smoke, Elena Royce, simple, steady, and unstoppable, prepared for the next battle, because there were always more walls to tear down. And now the world had seen exactly how she did it. 3 days after the purge at Altarara, the aftershocks began to ripple outward, far beyond the glittering glass tower in Manhattan. What had begun as whispers on finance forums erupted into headlines in the world's most powerful newsrooms. CEOs clutched their morning coffees tighter as they scanned front-page articles, stamped with Elena Royce's face and the chilling words, "The Royce standard is coming." It was no longer a scandal confined to one company. It was a reckoning. Across Wall Street, the old guard scrambled to brace for impact. In leather-chaired boardrooms, emergency meetings were convened. Reputation management firms billed overtime hours. Crisis consultants flew overnight from Zurich, London, Hong Kong, whispering desperate strategies into the ears of panicking executives. Memos flooded inboxes titled "Immediate Compliance Review," required blind hiring, procedures to be considered. Potential exposure, urgent response needed. But none of it could stop the tide. It wasn't just that Alterara had fallen. It was how it had fallen by the quiet force of a woman armed with nothing but patience, principle, and a plain white linen shirt. The imagery was too powerful, the metaphor too perfect. Every time a recruiter now glanced sideways at a candidate's appearance, every time a hiring panel joked about pedigree, Elena's shadow loomed large, unseen but undeniable. The first public move beyond Alterara came from Goldman Sachs. In a press conference strained with manufactured smiles, their global head of talent acquisition announced a pilot program of blind resume reviews inspired. They admitted reluctantly by recent events highlighting the urgent need for true meritocracy. Behind the podium, the executives' hands shook slightly, betraying just how terrified they were of being the next domino to fall. Within a week, UBS followed, then Morgan Stanley, then Deutsche Bank, like marionettes cutting their own strings. One by one, the financial titans scrambled to announce sweeping reforms, anonymized applications, standardized interviews, external audits. But it wasn't altruism, it was survival. The Royce Standard had become a litmus test. To resist it was to brand yourself as part of the old corrupt world the public had begun to despise. Elena watched it all unfold from a small sunlit room in her Brooklyn brownstone. She didn't host press conferences. She didn't gloat on television panels. She simply worked poring over dossiers, blueprints for change plans for a systemic revolution. Her tote ever present rested by her chair, stuffed with notes, sketches, letters from young women and men who had watched her story and dared to hope for themselves. On the 10th day, the call came from Davos. The World Economic Forum, that glittering annual gathering of the elite, extended an invitation. They wanted Elena to sit on a panel titled The Future of Corporate Integrity. Yeah, but it wasn't lost on her that last year that same panel had scoffed at concerns about diversity and inclusion, dismissing it as a PR challenge. Now they were begging her to be the face of reform. Elena arrived in Switzerland on a private flight funded by her foundation, refusing the dozens of luxury charters offered by companies. Desperate to curry favor, she stepped off the plane in the same linen shirt, clean-pressed but unmistakably plain, and flat shoes. Cameras flashed. Reporters screamed questions. She answered none. At Davos, among the tailored power suits and glittering watches, Elena stood out like a raw nerve, unvarnished, unbending. The panel was held in a grand hall packed with executives, investors, politicians, and journalists elbowing for space. The other speakers fidgeted at the long table. A tech CEO embroiled in labor lawsuits, a banking executive who had survived 3 discrimination scandals by hiding behind non-apology apologies, a venture capitalist who had once joked publicly that diversity is just cosmetic. Elena took her seat at the center. When her turn came, she didn't waste it on pleasantries. There is no future for companies who build walls instead of bridges. She said, her voice calm but slicing clean through the velvet-draped room. There is no survival for brands whose loyalty is to privilege rather than to merit. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Every word carried the weight of proof of careers ended. Systems exposed, towers toppled. A hush fell over the crowd. The tech CEO tried to smile, nodding as if agreeing, but the sweat shining on his forehead betrayed him. The banker shifted in his seat, crossing and uncrossing his legs. The venture capitalist glanced at his watch. Elena continued unblinking. Alterara was not unique. It was only the first to be caught. If you believe a glossy diversity report absolves you, you're wrong. If you think of a token hire saves you, you're wrong. If you think this will pass and you can resume business as usual, you are already obsolete. Silence, then a single pair of hands clapped, then another and another, until the entire room reluctantly at first, then with growing force, rose to their feet. Standing ovation, not for spectacle, but because they knew, even if they hated it, that the world had changed, and she was the architect of that change. Later, after the panel, Elena received private approaches, some genuine, most transactional. One CEO cornered her outside the forum hall, desperation bleeding from his voice. "What do we have to do?" he asked, "to avoid being the next Alterara?" Elena tilted her head, regarding him without malice. "Only truth, earn it," she said simply, "with every hire, every day." She left him standing there, swallowed by his own inadequacy. Back home, the movement Elena had sparked grew like wildfire. Law schools updated their corporate ethics curriculums. Nonprofits launched blind application toolkits. Government regulators debated new standards for federal contracts, favoring companies who adopted truly merit-based hiring. And most powerful of all, individuals found courage. A young woman in Atlanta wore a linen shirt to her first tech interview, aced it, and posted her story under Royce Standard. A man in Lagos submitted a resume stripped of all identifying details and got an offer on the strength of his ideas alone. A single mother in Chicago filmed herself walking into a bank headquarters for a job fair, her simple cotton dress pressed neatly, head held high, captioning the video, "Skills over suits." Within a month, the hashtag Royce Standard had over 100 million impressions across social platforms. It wasn't a policy anymore. It was a movement in Altarara, the once untouchable titan. It survived barely, but it was no longer feared, it was watched. Every posting, every promotion, every decision scrutinized not by scandal-chasing journalists, but by everyday people who now believed they had the right to demand better. Inside Altarara's headquarters, the chandeliers still sparkled, the marble floors still gleamed, but now the power didn't radiate from the suits striding across them. It radiated from the invisible promise hanging in the air. Earn your place or lose it. Elena, Royce didn't need a throne, a title, or a coronation. She had something far more dangerous. She had changed the rules of the game, and she was just getting started. The storm Elena had unleashed did not die down. It evolved, it spread, but so did the resistance. In the weeks after Davos, Elena watched from the quiet of her Brooklyn brownstone as messages began pouring in, thousands a day. Stories of people, emboldened barriers, shattered dreams, reignited. Corporations across industries scrambled to adopt variations of the Royce Standard, announcing blind hiring initiatives, launching audits of past hiring practices. Publicly, they praised her. Privately, the old power brokers seethed. The first sign came as a whisper. A former colleague from Zurich reached out discreetly, voice low over a scrambled call. He warned her that at least 3 major financial consortiums had begun closed-door meetings, not about adopting the Royce Standard, but about containing it. "They're scared of you," he said, "scared of what happens if real meritocracy actually takes hold." Elena thanked him, but she already knew. The established elite did not yield without a fight. They would not simply allow the world to change because it was right. Not when their very thrones were built on the sand she had just turned to quicksand. The backlash started subtle at first. Anonymous articles questioning Elena's credentials, implying that her success was orchestrated by hidden benefactors. Social media bots flooded comment sections with doubts asking why someone who married into wealth should lecture others on fairness. Influencers with suspiciously synchronized talking points cropped up overnight, suggesting that blind hiring was a utopian fantasy or dangerous to corporate stability. Elena understood the game. Misinformation, erosion, divide, and conquer. But she also knew something they didn't. Truth once seen could not be unseen. Instead of retreating, she advanced. Elena convened a secret summit in New York. A gathering of minds, carefully selected CEOs who truly wanted change. Activists who had been fighting in obscurity for decades. Economists, technologists, ethicists. They met in an old library she had rented out entirely for the weekend, its vaulted ceilings and dusty bookshelves providing the perfect contrast to the polished lies of corporate towers. There, by the dim golden light of antique chandeliers, they built something bigger than Altarara, bigger than the Royce Standard itself. They called it the Fair Access Coalition. It wasn't just about blind hiring. It was about tearing down every invisible wall in promotions and funding, in board appointments, in venture capital, and university admissions, a living framework of accountability, ethics, and equity. A blueprint for a new meritocratic era. Each member pledged transparency. Audits, whistleblower protections, public disclosure of hiring metrics. Penalties for violations that mattered, not just fines that companies shrugged off, but real consequences. Delistings, investor exits, leadership removals. It was daring. It was radical. It was a direct threat to the old order. By the end of the summit, 70 companies signed the charter. Within a month, it grew to 150. Within 2 months, it had 500. Small startups and billion-dollar giants alike wore the fair access seal like armor against the coming storm. And the storm came. On a rain-slick night in late March, Elena received an anonymous envelope slipped under her door. No return address, inside a printed photo, grainy but unmistakable, of her daughter leaving her school. A shadowy figure blurred in the distance. A simple note accompanied it. Stay in your lane. Elena sat at the kitchen table, the photo resting between her hands. Her husband Nathan came in a few minutes later, saw her face and knew without asking. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Nathan pulled out his phone, contacting private security firms. Elena quietly canceled public appearances. For the first time since the beginning, the war she had started felt less like a movement and more like a personal battlefield. And she was the primary target. But fear was a currency she refused to spend. Instead, she strengthened the coalition's defenses, cybersecurity fortifications, legal shields, anonymous, tip lines for any threats. She worked longer hours, slept less, but never wavered. She also adapted. At the next Fair Access announcement, Elena didn't appear in person. She appeared by livestream, her face projected against the walls of the New York Stock Exchange, itself flanked by hundreds of coalition members who stood shoulder to shoulder on the trading floor. In a voice that carried to every ringing bell and echoing corridor, she spoke. You cannot intimidate an idea. You cannot threaten a stand-in. You cannot unsee the truth. The applause shook the rafters. On the same day, several legacy companies who had refused to sign on to Fair Access suffered coordinated whistleblower leaks. Internal memos detailing biased hiring practices, screenshots of executives mocking diversity efforts, bank records revealing hush payments to cover up discrimination. Lawsuits. The leaks were not orchestrated by Elena. They didn't have to be. The dam had broken. The people within those corrupt systems were tearing them down from the inside, facing financial ruin, public fury, and mass resignations. Even the most arrogant firms began crawling toward change, not out of enlightenment, but out of necessity. Elena became a symbol, a battle cry. Her tote bag, immortalized in photos, was replicated on posters, on murals, on T-shirts worn by students, protesting outdated recruitment policies across campuses from Boston to Bangalore. Still, the attacks didn't stop. Anonymous threats escalated. Her financial foundation was audited twice under dubious pretenses. Investigators tailed her friends, her former colleagues. Opinion pieces painted her as an extremist, a zealot, a destabilizer. She absorbed it all. Because Elena knew a deeper truth. Every system protects itself before it falls. One night, unable to sleep, she sat by the window watching the city lights flicker against the rain-smeared glass. Her daughter slept upstairs, her husband reading in the study. In the reflection, Elena caught her own face lined with exhaustion. Yes, but alight with something fierce, resilience, conviction. A quiet fire that no campaign of fear could snuff out. She thought of every woman turned away at an interview because her clothes weren't expensive enough. Every first-generation student overlooked because his resume didn't carry a prestigious name. Every brilliant mind crushed under the weight of invisible biases. They were her army, and she would not leave them leaderless. At dawn, Elena drafted a new manifesto, bolder, sharper, for fair access. Mandatory quarterly audits, public scorecards, zero tolerance for retaliation against whistleblowers. The Royce Standard was no longer just a hiring reform. It was a revolution of accountability. By summer, Fair Access controlled $13 trillion in market capitalization. Investors began demanding membership in the coalition as a prerequisite for funding. Pension funds redirected billions away from non-compliant firms. Universities demanded proof of compliance before granting endowments. The world had shifted on its axis, and Elena Royce, once mocked for a linen shirt and a canvas tote, was now the axis around which that new world spun. But she knew better than to celebrate. The old world wasn't dead, it was wounded. And wounded beasts were the most dangerous, the world. Elena had set into motion no longer moved at her pace alone. It thundered forward, an avalanche gaining force, sometimes beautiful, sometimes terrifying, in its momentum. She had known it would grow beyond her, but she hadn't expected how deeply it would change her life or what it would cost her. In the months following the launch of the Fair Access Coalition's new manifesto, governments began to intervene. Regulators from the European Union, Canada, and even traditionally resistant markets like Hong Kong announced proposals that echoed the coalition's principles. Mandatory transparency in hiring, independent audits, penalties for systemic bias. It was everything Elena had dreamed of. Yet the reality was more brutal than dreams ever hinted. Resistance didn't just harden in boardrooms. It metastasized into politics. A coalition of old money interests and threatened industries formed a shadow network called the Merit Preservation Council. They flooded media with scare campaigns, warnings that blind hiring would cripple innovation, lower standards, destroy traditional values. Dark money flowed into think tanks producing white papers designed to look neutral, but dripping with subtle racism, sexism, and classism disguised as concern for meritocracy. And Elena Royce was painted as the villain of it all. Talk show hosts lambasted her nightly. The billionaire's wife telling real workers how to get jobs, one sneered. Others questioned if she had orchestrated the Alterera scandal for personal gain, ignoring the fact that exposing it had cost her more safety and peace than any fortune could buy. For every story of hope she received from around the world, there was a smear, a threat, a shadow waiting on her street corner. Nathan tried to shield her from the worst of it. He hired new security teams, installed new systems at their brownstone, refused to let her travel without escort. But there were battles even he couldn't fight for her. One evening, returning from a closed-door session with the UN Economic Council, where they were discussing adopting fair access standards for international development grants, Elena's car was blocked 2 streets from her home. A group of masked protesters, hired and staged but frightening, all the same, surrounded the vehicle, banging fists on the windows, shouting slurs and insults through megaphones. Destroyer of tradition, elitist fraud, take your fake meritocracy and go home. The driver kept the doors locked, face pale as security scrambled to clear a path. Elena sat in the back seat, still her toad on her lap. She could hear her daughter's favorite piano piece playing faintly from a neighbor's window nearby, in eerie contrast to the violence outside. When they finally broke through the blockade and reached her street, she found the brownstone defaced red spray paint streaked across the front. "You will fail," Nathan met her at the door, his face tight, his arms pulling her into a fierce embrace before she could even speak. Their daughter was upstairs safe, but frightened a security officer sitting outside her room like a silent guardian angel. That night, after tucking her daughter into bed with a story and a kiss, Elena sat at the kitchen table with Nathan, the old wooden surface between them cluttered with security reports, political memos, and legal briefs. Nathan reached across, taking her hand. His voice was steady, but she could hear the crack beneath it. "They're escalating," he said. "They know they're losing." "I know," she whispered back. He squeezed her fingers. "You don't have to carry it alone." But Elena had always known that real change, seismic, world-altering change, demanded sacrifice from those who dared to demand it, and the sacrifice was coming. It began as a whisper within her own coalition. Some member companies, under pressure from board investors and political lobbying, began quietly backing away. Statements grew vaguer. Commitments softened. Deadlines extended indefinitely. Elena convened an emergency summit at the same library where fair access had been born. Only half of the original members showed up. The others sent polite regrets, claiming scheduling conflicts unconvincing in their transparency. The betrayal came during the second hour of the meeting. One of the founding members, a woman Elena had mentored personally, helped rescue from career blacklisting after she spoke out against corruption, stood up and proposed a restructuring of fair access's core principles. "We should be pragmatic," she said, not meeting Elena's eyes. "Flexibility will protect the movement long term." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Elena rose slowly, her chair scraping softly against the old wood floor. Her gaze swept over the faces around her, faces she had trusted, faces she had fought for, now clouded with fear, calculation, survival. "If we dilute the standard," Elena said quietly, "then we become the very thing we fought to change." Silence. The woman Marissa, her former protege, didn't flinch. "Without compromise, we risk losing everything." Elena shook her head. "Without integrity, we have already lost everything." The vote came 2 days later. The coalition split. Those who stayed true to the original Fair Access Manifesto were a minority, a fierce, stubborn minority. The rest, the cowards, the opportunists, the exhausted, broke away, forming their own watered-down initiative with pretty branding and meaningless metrics. The media lauded the split as healthy debate. Elena knew better. It was a tactical wound inflicted by those who had been waiting for any chance to divide her forces. Nathan found her in the garden that evening, sitting on the worn stone steps, staring at the wild roses they had planted years ago. Some bloomed defiantly in the warm spring air. Others were withering, strangled by creeping ivy. He sat beside her, not speaking. Finally, Elena exhaled. "We're losing ground," she said. No, Nathan answered. You're making the ground shake. They're just clinging harder because they know they can't stand forever. She turned her face to him, the corners of her mouth trembling between bitterness and gratitude. But it costs so much, Nathan. It costs everything. He kissed her forehead gently. Change always does. Later that night, Elena opened her tote and removed her battered notebook, the same one she had carried into Altarara that day so long ago. She turned to a blank page. At the top, she wrote in firm, steady letters, "The Second Uprising." Because Elena Royce had not come this far to settle for half measures, because even a cracked coalition, even betrayal, could not destroy the truth she had unleashed, because every system that clung to corruption had already lost the war the moment they chose survival over soul, and because if the world wanted a second revolution to finish what the first had started, she was ready. And this time, she wouldn't just tear down the walls. She would salt the ruins so nothing like them could ever rise again. Elena didn't announce the second uprising with press releases or grand speeches. She moved in silence, gathering strength like a storm over distant hills, invisible until it broke with fury. She understood now that public pressure alone wasn't enough. Symbolism could ignite hearts, but only strategy could bring down empires. The old world had taught her that even as it tried to crush her, her first move was to rebuild her forces, but smarter this time, deeper. Not just CEOs and activists willing to stand in the light. She needed allies in the shadows too. Forensic accountants, cybersecurity experts, investigative journalists, whistleblowers, trapped in the bowels of corrupted corporations, waiting for a signal that someone would catch them if they jumped. She started with Maria Alvarez, a forensic auditor who had once exposed a billion-dollar embezzlement scandal in South America. Before being blackballed by every major bank, Elena flew to meet her in a dusty cafe in Madrid, her linen shirt blending with the locals, her tote slung casually over one shoulder. Maria was skeptical at first. She'd seen too many idealists eaten alive by the system. "What makes you different?" she asked, stirring her bitter coffee. Elena smiled, tired but unbroken. "I don't want to fix the system," she said. "I want to build something that makes the old system irrelevant." Maria studied her for a long moment, then extended her hand. "Deal." Next came Elijah Boone, a hacker once branded a criminal for exposing illegal surveillance programs at a major telecom. He was living off the grid in the Pacific Northwest. When Elena found him, coaxed him out of hiding, with an offer no money could buy, a real shot at reshaping the world. Within 2 months, Elena had assembled a clandestine network codename, Second Light. Their mission wasn't protest, it was exposure. Systematic, undeniable, brutal truth-telling. While the breakaway members of Fair Access paraded their hollow new charters on television, congratulating themselves on reasonable reforms, Second Light infiltrated. They combed through HR databases, financial ledgers, internal memos. They traced secret payments to lobbying groups, flagged fake diversity statistics, documented quotas that were whispered about but never published. Every lie the old world had built its power upon Second Light, collected it like dry tinder. But exposure alone wasn't enough. Elena knew she needed to hit where it hurt most, reputation and revenue. Working with Elijah, they created an anonymous platform called True Merit, a public ledger where any verified employee could anonymously upload hiring practices from inside their company, interview transcripts, salary discrepancies, proof of nepotism, bias in promotions, discrimination in reviews. It was built on blockchain architecture, unalterable and traceable only for authenticity. Within days of its launch, uploads flooded in screenshots of executives rejecting candidates based on last names they couldn't pronounce, chat logs mocking applicants' accents, financial spreadsheets showing pay gaps that companies swore didn't exist, and every piece of evidence was tied irrevocably to real brands. The media tried to downplay it at first. Too explosive, too uncomfortable, but True Merit wasn't a press release you could ignore. It was public living proof accessible to anyone with an internet connection. Investors panicked. Consumers boycotted governments, launched formal investigations, dragged CEOs into hearings. Suddenly, the companies that had broken away from Fair Access weren't the safe bet anymore. They were radioactive, and Elena didn't stop them. She brokered secret alliances with major pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, and high-profile private investors who had grown weary of scandals devaluing their portfolios. She showed them the data, hold undeniable, that companies adhering to True Merit standards not only outperformed on ethics, but were now outperforming financially too, As younger generations voted with their wallets and their labor, money moved faster than outrage ever could. By autumn, nearly 30 major corporations reversed course and begged to rejoin fair access under its original charter. Elena didn't make it easy. Each rejoining required full independent audits, public apologies, executive resignations. There were no quiet deals, no secret handshakes. Every restoration was an act of public penance. And all the while, Elena stayed in the background, the architect rather than the idol. She gave no interviews, no TED Talks, no self-congratulatory memoirs. She let the results speak, but even victories left scars. One evening, Elena sat by the fire pit in their small backyard. A thick sweater pulled tight against the first hints of winter. Nathan joined her, 2 mugs of coffee in his hands, silent understanding passing between them. Their daughter was at a sleepover, blissfully unaware of the battles her mother waged by day and guarded against by night. "You know what they're saying now?" Nathan asked, a wry smile touching his lips. Elena raised an eyebrow. "That you're a myth. A construct that no one woman could have caused this much change." Elena huffed a laugh, shaking her head. "Good. Let them think that a myth can't be sued or sabotaged." Nathan leaned closer, voice softer. "But you're not a myth. You're flesh and blood, and they're still trying to tear you down." Elena looked into the flames, watching them dance and curl. "I know," she said, "but I can't stop, not yet." Nathan didn't argue. He never did when it came to her calling, but he hesitated, then set his coffee aside and took her hand in both of his. "There's something you need to know," he said, his voice low, almost breaking. "The Merit Preservation Council, they have started targeting coalition families, not just executives, spouses, kids." Elena's heart squeezed painfully in her chest. Nathan continued, "Our daughter, she's safe for now, but there have been surveillance vans spotted near her school. Strange calls to the house. We can tighten security change routines, but Elena..." He faltered for a moment in the rarest crack in his armor. "Maybe it's time to think about stepping back. Just for a while." For the first time in months, Elena let herself feel the weight of it. Not just the global battles, but the private costs, the growing danger pressed against the edges of their family. Could she risk her daughter's safety for this fight? Could she live with herself if she walked away? She closed her eyes, breathing in the cold, smoke-laced air. Images flooded her mind, the women who wrote her letters about being rejected for jobs because of their headscarves, the men passed over because of their accents, the brilliant, overlooked students working double shifts because no one cared enough to read beyond their last names. They had no one else fighting for them. And if she stopped now, it wouldn't just slow the revolution. It would kill it. When she opened her eyes, they burned with clarity. "We tighten security," she said softly. "We adapt, but we don't stop." Nathan's grip tightened around hers. No anger, no pleading, just acceptance, fierce and loyal, and love the kind built not on ease, but on shared sacrifice. Together, they sat by the fire until the embers glowed low, planning how to outlast a world that still thought it could outweigh her. Because Elena Royce wasn't fighting for her legacy. She was fighting for a future she might never live to see, but that others would, and that was worth every battle still to come. Winter wrapped the city in a heavy gray stillness as Elena prepared for what would become her final stand. Snow fell in lazy spirals outside the brownstone windows, muffling the sounds of New York's relentless pulse. For once, even the city seemed to hold its breath. The Merit Preservation Council had escalated their offensive. After months of subtle attacks, they launched a full frontal assault, a lawsuit filed under Elena's name, accusing her of defamation, corporate sabotage, even conspiracy to commit fraud. The charges were laughable, fabricated with such transparent desperation that most legal analysts dismissed them instantly. But the goal wasn't victory in court. The goal was attrition, to drain Elena's resources, to force her into seclusion, to smear her name in the public consciousness until her influence shrank under the weight of endless accusation. Elena stood at the tall windows of her home, watching snow settle onto the iron fence, feeling the tension hum in the walls around her. Her security team had doubled. Reporters camped outside the block, now their camera lenses like cold, blinking eyes. Nathan entered the room silently, a cup of tea in his hand. He didn't need to ask how she felt. It was written in the rigid line of her shoulders, the quiet fury in her breath. "They're betting you'll cave under the noise," he said, setting the tea down beside her. Elena's lips tightened into a thin smile. Then they still don't understand me. Outside a news van idled, somewhere a child's laughter rang out as a snowball hit its mark. Life indifferent to battles of pride and power went on that night. Elena met with her inner circle, not at a sleek boardroom or a rented hall, but at the Brooklyn brownstone itself. She wanted no distance between herself and the people who had carried the second revolution with her. Maria Alvarez, Elijah Boone, and a dozen others sat around the heavy oak dining table, their faces weary but unyielding. Papers spread before them, draft statements, court responses, contingency plans. "We fight it all the way," Maria said, tapping the lawsuit with her pen. "We don't let them frame the narrative. They want a public trial," Elijah added grimly. "They want to drag your name through months of headlines." Elena nodded slowly. She understood every step she had taken led to this moment, but she also knew the truth about revolutions. The leader wasn't meant to survive them intact. "I'm not fighting this in the courtroom," she said, her voice steady. Heads snapped toward her, startled. "I'm fighting it where they can't win out there." She gestured toward the city sprawling beyond the frosted windows. In the open, with the people, confusion flickered across the faces around her. Maria leaned forward. "What are you thinking?" Elena met their gazes, her hazel eyes burning with something deeper than anger, something like liberation. "I'm taking it all public. Everything we've built, everything they've tried to hide. I'll testify in front of the world. I'll expose every company, every executive, every transaction we've traced, not behind closed doors, on live broadcast." A stunned silence filled the room. Maria was the first to find her voice. "You realize they'll destroy your personal life, your privacy. Maybe worse." Elena smiled, then, not recklessly, but like someone who had already counted the cost and paid it. "They already tried." She said, "I'm still standing," and so the plan was set. The announcement came 2 days later. Elena Royce would hold an open hearing at the Lincoln Center, inviting any journalist, any regulator, any citizen willing to listen. No pre-screened questions, no rehearsed statements, just the raw truth. Tickets vanished within hours. Networks scrambled to secure broadcasting rights. Social media exploded with speculation. Supporters rallied under #Elena Speaks. Critics sharpened their knives, convinced she would collapse under pressure. On the morning of the hearing, Elena dressed with slow deliberation. No power suit, no expensive jewelry. She wore the same white linen shirt pressed crisp, the same plain cream trousers, the same scuffed flats. Her tote, the one that had weathered every battle, hung from her shoulder, heavy with documents. Proof and memory. Nathan drove her to Lincoln Center himself, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. Their daughter was with trusted friends, safe beyond the city limits. As they pulled up to the grand steps of the center, a wall of sound greeted them. Thousands gathered outside, holding signs that read, "Truth over power. We are Elena. Skills, not suits." And above them all, a giant projection against the marble facade, a simple image of Elena's tote bag with the words, "You cannot intimidate an idea." Inside the great hall buzzed with electricity. The air seemed charged, vibrating with anticipation. Fear, hope. Elena took the stage alone. No entourage, no handlers, just a woman with a battered tote and an iron will. She stepped up to the podium and placed the tote beside her, pulled out a single page, looked out at the sea of faces, skeptics, allies, strangers, and she began. She spoke of what she had seen at Altarara, what she had uncovered through True Merit, the betrayals inside, fair access, the pressures and threats that had mounted when she refused to bow. She read names, dates, transaction details. She laid bare the machinery of systemic exclusion with the precision of a surgeon and the fury of a mother protecting her children. Every revelation hit like a hammer. Executives watching from glass towers paled. Investors whispered furiously into phones. Lawmakers scrambled to distance themselves from corporations now exposed as complicit. And through it all, Elena's voice never wavered. She didn't speak like a politician or a martyr. She spoke like what she was, a citizen who had refused to look away. When she finished, she reached back into her tote and pulled out the battered copy of The Wealth of Nations, the same book she had carried into Altarara on the day they had mocked her. She held it up. "That worm," she said, her voice carrying across the cavernous hall, "was written to imagine a world where opportunity was not chained to birthright, where work and worth walked hand in hand. We have failed that vision for too long, but failure is not the end. It's the beginning, if we have the courage to make it so. She placed the book on the podium like a torch being passed. I will face their lawsuits. I will face their lies. I will face their threats, but I will never face regret for having stood when it mattered. The room erupted, not with polite applause, but with a roar, a primal, unstoppable roar that shook the rafters and spilled out into the streets beyond. That night, Elena returned home exhausted, but lighter than she had felt in years. She knew the legal battles would drag on. She knew new enemies would rise, but the world had heard her, and no lawsuit could unhear the truth. 2 months later, when the courts finally dismissed the fabricated charges against her as baseless, it was almost an afterthought. By then, fair access had grown into a global force, and the companies who had tried to destroy her were shrinking, irrelevant relics of a crumbling past. Elena Royce never returned to corporate life. She didn't need to. Instead, she spent her days mentoring a new generation. Young leaders who bore no interest in old privileges, only in building a world where merit wasn't a marketing slogan, but a lived reality. In the quiet of her brownstone, she still kept the tote bag near the kitchen table, frayed, faded, but indestructible, like the idea she had carried within it and into history.